The most dangerous moment did not arrive when Hitler made his worst decision. It arrived earlier, when his decisions stopped competing with alternatives at all. Power is often described as something that isolates over time, but isolation was not the starting condition here. At first, authority sharpened attention. It pulled information inward. It demanded forecasts, assessments, counter-arguments. The contradiction that opened the path to disaster was subtle. The more successful command appeared, the less it seemed to require resistance in order to function. Listening did not vanish. It thinned slowly, as certainty crowded the space where doubt once lived. The loss was quiet, almost administrative. Germany entered the war surrounded by institutions designed to speak upward. The general staff was dense with experience drawn from previous conflicts. Civil ministries tracked production, fuel, transport, and labor. Intelligence agencies produced estimates that did not flatter intuition. The machinery of the state generated an unceasing flow of detail. Meetings were scheduled, briefings prepared, maps marked and remarked. Authority did not initially reject this apparatus, it used it. Hitler's position within this structure was unusual, not because he commanded, but because his command was personal rather than procedural. Legitimacy did not rest on office alone. It rested on perceived instinct. Early political consolidation and rapid military success fused authority with outcome. Victories in Poland, Norway, France did not merely defeat opponents. They reordered internal hierarchy. Each success narrowed the space in which contradiction could survive without penalty. The terrain of decision-making shifted. Listening in this environment became conditional. Information that reinforced momentum flowed easily. Information that questioned it acquired weight. Not because it was false, but because it threatened the narrative of inevitability that power had begun to require. Authority does not only seek obedience, it seeks coherence. And coherence becomes fragile when it depends on being right. As the war expanded, Hitler intervened more directly in operational matters. This was framed as engagement, even diligence. Conferences grew longer. Orders grew more detailed. Maps became sites of performance where intent was drawn as certainty. Professional judgment remained present, but it was no longer sovereign. It existed to be overridden. Institutions adjusted without formal command. Officers learned what tone survived meetings. Reports softened language. Uncertainty was deferred. Estimates were framed with optimism first and caution later, if at all. No single order mandated distortion. The structure produced it naturally. Authority reshaped the climate in which truth could appear. The Führerprinzip concentrated not only power, but responsibility. Responsibility, when singular, becomes intolerant of error. When error becomes intolerant, it must be displaced. In this system, displacement took the form of confidence. Confidence traveled upward faster than contradiction. Over time, it was confidence that returned. Listening requires friction. It requires that information, once received, can alter direction. But direction had become identity. To change course was no longer a tactical adjustment. It was an admission that intuition had limits. For a regime built on the myth of singular insight, limits were corrosive. The early years of the Eastern Front marked a turning. The scale of the conflict exceeded precedent. Distances were vast. Supply lines stretched thin. Weather, terrain, and attrition imposed demands that could not be negotiated. Reports reflected this. Requests for flexibility multiplied. So did refusals. Hitler's authority did not fail because it ignored facts. It failed because it reclassified them. Difficulties became temporary. Resistance became exaggerated. Retreat became moral weakness rather than operational necessity. Each category shift preserved authority at the cost of responsiveness. Power insulated itself against correction. As losses mounted, the pattern hardened. Commanders were dismissed not for failure alone, but for deviation. Loyalty became the metric that replaced competence when outcomes disappointed. This did not eliminate expertise, it subordinated it. Those who remained learned that survival depended on alignment, not accuracy. The system continued to generate information, but it no longer circulated freely. What reached the center had already adapted. Warnings became muted. Alternatives were presented as footnotes. Silence filled the gaps. Silence, in this context, was not absence. It was compliance. By the middle years of the war, Hitler's listening was ritualized. He demanded reports. He reviewed maps. He absorbed details. But absorption did not imply openness. Decisions emerged unchanged. The feedback loop was severed. Information entered, but it did not act. This was not delusion in the clinical sense. It was coherence enforced at scale. The leader's belief in his own indispensability required constant reinforcement. The system supplied it. Each layer adjusted to protect the core assumption. Over time, the adjustment became automatic. Power became self-confirming. As the strategic situation deteriorated, authority tightened rather than yielded. Orders grew more absolute. Prohibitions multiplied. Retreat was forbidden in language that framed withdrawal as betrayal. Geography was commanded to obey. Weather was treated as inconvenience. Material constraints were denied by declaration. The cost of listening rose as the value of listening fell. Those still capable of speaking truth upward faced a dilemma. To insist was to risk removal. To comply was to become complicit. Many chose a third path: delay, ambiguity, technical compliance without confrontation. This preserved position without altering outcome. The structure rewarded it. By the final phase of the war, Hitler's isolation was complete, but not empty. He was surrounded by affirmation. Advisors repeated assumptions. Briefings mirrored intention. The world beyond the bunker ceased to matter except as confirmation or affront. What collapsed was not simply strategy. It was the relationship between authority and reality. The inward fracture did not announce itself as doubt. It announced itself as necessity. To continue listening would have required acknowledging that power had limits, that judgment had failed, that authority no longer commanded conditions. Such acknowledgement would have unraveled the legitimacy on which obedience depended. The structure could not survive that admission. The uncomfortable question lingers beneath the wreckage. At what point does listening become incompatible with unchecked power? Not because power forbids hearing, but because it cannot survive being changed by what it hears. The erosion was cumulative. Each ignored warning made the next easier to dismiss. Each dismissal narrowed the channel further. Over time, listening ceased to be a function of leadership and became a gesture performed for continuity. In the end, the regime spoke into itself. Orders circulated without effect. Compliance persisted without capacity. Authority remained intact long after responsiveness had vanished. The pattern does not belong to one figure or one era. It belongs to power that confuses confirmation with stability. When authority becomes dependent on being right, it cannot afford to be informed. It will accept information only insofar as it preserves itself. The war ended, but the structure remains recognizable. Power that cannot tolerate friction will always seek insulation. It will always reward silence. It will always mistake agreement for truth. The voice does not fade. It echoes. And in that echo, listening becomes the first casualty, long before disaster arrives. If this story gave you something to think about, consider subscribing to Timeless Questions. We explore history, philosophy, and the patterns that quietly guide human behavior.